Sorry to push you to 15 minutes, but we have read the paper. Do you want to have a water before you start? Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Have a water. Have a breather. Yeah, not nice. Is that mic on?
That's better.
Right.
I think I would like to run through. Good morning, councillors, and thank you for the opportunity to talk through this grant scheme. I would like the opportunity to quickly go through the presentation, as what we've done here is just raise the half a dozen or so really key points of the proposal. So about 5 years ago, or up to 5 years ago, Council had a grant scheme running which gave small amounts of money to community groups for waste minimisation projects. That scheme was stopped in order to be able to increase some of the staff resource that was needed to do other waste minimisation work as well. However, we were looking forward at the time to an increase in the waste levy and therefore the amount of subsidy that was coming in. And so looking ahead to a point in time where we might be able to reintroduce the grant scheme. When the Waste Management and Minimisation Plan was adopted in December 23, an action was left in there under the Porirua Local Action Plan to reinstate the grant scheme at some point in the future. So that's where we are here today. A quick review of where the levy actually comes from. We collect waste at Spicer Landfill. Of every tonne that comes through the gate, about $60, well, sorry, not about, exactly, $60 is paid to the Ministry for the Environment. The MFE keep half of that and they dispense the other half to local authorities. We don't get half of our 60 back. There's only 40 Class 1 landfills in the country. There's about 67 local authorities. So the distribution is a little bit less than half, but on a very rough basis, it's approximately $20 per head of population for each council. The money that we receive, which I'll refer to as the levy or the levy subsidy, has to be spent on actions which are in council's adopted WMMP. So for the 25-26 year, that's the next financial year during which we want to restart this grant scheme, we would be receiving about 1.2 million. That's an almost tenfold increase from what it was about 6-7 years ago. Our early planning ahead for next year and taking into account all of the actions in the WMMP, the relative priorities and the impact that might be made by each of those actions, we've done a little cast over the basic allocations of what that 1.2 million worth of subsidy would be doing next year. The bulk of it will be going into recycling and reuse and recovery activities, and a good portion of that, somewhere around 400,000, is proposed to be going straight into the curbside recycling service and the bulk recycling facility at Spicer Landfill. The waste minimisation education contains a number of actions with integrating with both business community and also community groups, education and community events. Assisting business and community groups would be where the grant would be coming from as part of that allocation. Just a note on Action 17, Councillor Hayward nodding your head because you're familiar with this one as our rep on the Regional WMMP Committee. Action 17, as adopted in December 23, was to provide grants. That's to say that was our intention at this point to come to Council and say, here's our proposal, we'd like to get this back underway again. The bare bones of how we propose to do it is to put aside 10% of the levy. So that's not a fixed amount per se, 10%, however, would be in the order of about 124,000 a year. The reason we don't know exactly how much is because of the source of that funding being from those 40 Class 1 landfills throughout the country. Obviously, the levy getting paid into the MFE rises and falls over time as waste rises and falls going into those landfills. We're proposing to split the grant into two portions, one of small grants worth up to $2,000 per year, and that would be administered by an internal panel from within the waste team, and a large grant which would be up to $30,000 per year, which would be a panel which would propose would be wider than the waste team and potentially also with a councillor representative as well. And just a few examples of where it's been spent. We're not alone. There's around 25 councils in the country that offer such a grant scheme. Digital Futures Aotearoa is a group that helps secondary school students to learn how laptops work, for example. In KCDC, two schemes are currently being funded through the grant scheme, one for the e-bike collection system, which is taking organic waste by the bucket load from households around Paikokariki and helping to supply a community garden. And another one which is funding provided to a business called Koakoa Kapiti. If you're not familiar with their limoncello, honestly it's the best. They have a scheme whereby you can return your spirit bottles purchased from Koakoa and they will be recycled and turned around, filled again and back out onto the market. I think, Chair, I'll stop there. I'm very happy to take any questions or comments or hear any issues.
Jeff.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm mindful that we will be as efficient as possible in going through this workshop. First of all, David, please pass on my thanks, I'm sure that I won't be alone here, to officers in the preparation of this proposed plan. It is great to see this happening. I'm a very strong supporter of this. Before I get to my questions, I just want to, it could be considered a communication, for lack of a better word. During the submissions on the solid waste minimisation plan, the regional plan, we had submitters who came in, including Porirua. I reflect on Makarita from Wesley Community Action, who talked about the need for being able to have small funding or support for smaller community-based activities to help in waste minimisation, waste diversion. This meets that expectation. So we are meeting the needs of our community and doing something like this. So I'm a very strong proponent of it, and thank you. My questions are would a fund like this limit our council's ability to fund other projects, the large-scale projects that I'm thinking about? Because we obviously, by diverting that, there's a potential risk that we won't have as much money available to deal with our larger-scale projects. Can you go into that?
Yes, certainly. So the way the WMMP is structured, we've got two action plans in there. One is the regional action plan, and that is where we are intending to do projects with our regional partners, and we will all put in a share of each. Porirua City Council's share of a regional project is 11% based on our population. That funding, so with this allocation here, takes into account all of those actions which we already know about, which we have collectively, regionally agreed, these are our priorities. We have estimates against those actions, so that's allocated off. With regard to the local action plan, as you'll see in the WMMP, I won't open it up here, but there are a number of actions which are basically staff time, no funding involved, but there are other things which do require funding. So, for example, in the last year, we've commenced our battery collection service downstairs, which has been running extremely well since December. The company that provides that bin has picked up 140 kilos worth of batteries from our various service centres. So that's been a great success, but that has a small cost to it, about $13,000 a year. We're also looking at providing a polystyrene drop-off point at Trash Palace, which will have a small cost to it, but you'll be able to pay to bring in a couple of rubbish bags worth of polystyrene, for example. So those things all have costs attached and they're all allocated within here. So we're safe.
Thank you for that last point. My next question is, you've actually answered my second one, so that's great. We'll move to the next one. As you have pointed out, the levy is based, it has a connection with the number of Class 1 landfills across the entire Motu. We currently have one, but there is a discussion about the potential for that site to no longer be a Class 1. Does that impact our council's ability to continue to have certainty of funding through the waste minimisation levy? And how do you have any commentary as a council on how we would be able to do that in terms of managing, especially managing expectations with our community?
There is a point at which we're shielded from, let's say, if there were only 2 regional landfills. The levy funding that goes to the MFE is based on total refuse disposed at Class 1 facilities. There are 40 of those. There could be 39, there could be whatever. There will still be that same amount of waste being disposed nationally. At the moment, through those 40 Class 1s, it's about 3.5 million tonnes worth a year. So that will still happen unless there is a massive reduction. Secondly, we don't draw, as I said, exactly on what we pay the MFE. It's that national pool of funding. The greater threat to the level of subsidy that would occur is if legislation changed and the Waste Management Act 2008, which currently says 50% to the government, 50% to local authorities, if that ratio was changed, that's the biggest threat that we've got.
Last question. I recall a recent conversation that I've had with the chief executive through email with regards to the monitoring of people using our recycling bins for just recycling, and we've had to reintroduce spot checks in Titahi Bay as part of their rubbish. And I recall, and I think councillors who've been with me around the table recall, that it does serve as an effective, well, it can serve as an effective stick, but we should also be looking at an effective carrot as well. Is this a mechanism by which either community or community in conjunction with council provide a mechanism for which we can provide a financial incentive to those who are demonstrating that their bins are perfectly good and clean, and it creates a competitive model with individual households to help boost their participation? So again, using a carrot, I think the example I used when we talked about this was all the properties that have been participating in the scan are being tracked because they have to as part of the 3 strikes rule. And for those who have got a clean bin or have no issues, they could go into the draw to win, a supermarket voucher. Or if we really don't want to go with a third party and we don't want to make that choice, a rates rebate. Wouldn't that be something? Or water tank, right? Does this mechanism allow that potential to happen?
The grant scheme itself doesn't. However, so what we're targeting here is someone who wishes, and it might be the 3 examples I put forward for community composting schemes, a number of things. We weren't looking for that type of positive behaviour reward necessarily out of the grant scheme. That's not out of the realm of imagination to say someone might put forward something that they add to it with funding of their own. However, with regard to the deployment of the entire subsidy, there are other LAP actions in which something like that might fall.
There are no more questions, but thank you again. I'm looking forward to seeing some of these wonderful applications that come in and the work of grassroots.
Thank you. That was a good paper, I have to say. I'm pleased to hear you're looking at polystyrene. Any time frame around that? Because we get asked about that all the time.
We're asked about the same, the packaging that comes out of your new fridge or your new TV. It's a problem to get rid of. The time frame it's imminent. Trash Palace have already agreed with us that they will host the drop-off point. There's some number of bags to be purchased for the polystyrene to go to Palmerston North. So we're possibly weeks, maybe a month or so away.
So Trash Palace are no longer taking old appliances and small ones and everything else. Where can people take those now? Because that's the next big thing that's coming up.
Yeah, whiteware appliances can now go straight up to the refuse transfer station and they're dealt with there.
Okay. Josh.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it was more just a comment that I had around really support this, and in particular I recall back to, I think it may have actually been our previous long-term plan. We had a few community groups approach and say that they wanted to us to help them with things like community composting, and at the time, trying to remember the discussion around it, but we weren't able to do that. It sounds like something like this would potentially be the answer to exactly that. So just wanted to express enthusiasm for that. I think it's a really good idea. And yeah, something like this where we can enable our community to do the things that we know they want to be doing is exactly the sort of approach we should be taking across the board in local government, I think. So support this great paper. Thank you.
Anyone else? No? You've done brilliant. Oh, yep, Kathleen.
Yeah, I also think that it's a great initiative as well, assisting businesses and community groups and just getting more of a local community voice and buy-in. I did want to ask, though, with regards to the orange slice there, the recycle, reuse, recovery, is that the operative, like the operations side of recycling? Is that what that money's for?
Not for the operations, no. So the operation of the curbside recycling contract is funded through a targeted rate.
Right.
The allocation of funding in here, the 600, is basically, think of it as wraparound care to reinforce the behaviour out of that scheme. It also provides for recycling bins to schools. So there's some add-ons to that contract. The contract itself is targeted rate, but there's other work that goes in behind the scenes as well.
So your example, so do all schools or just some schools get recycling bins?
All schools who applied to us at the time the current contract commenced in 2018 get a recycling service.
Just for the curbside recycling service, just remember that through the LTP we are completely looking at overhauling rubbish and recycling services, and recycling to schools is one of the streams of work that we'll be looking at closely as part of that work.
What's this? Can someone just clarify, like with regards to businesses when they want to, like, just get rid of their cardboard and all that? Are they not able to come up to Spicer and put it through, those different bins?
No, the bulk recycling facility, as stated for in the current solid waste bylaw, is intended for domestic drop-off. Our difficulty is that if we were to open that to full commercial, that facility would be nowhere near the size it needs to be. So we maintain domestic drop-off point for those people who maybe have too much to go in their bin, or they might miss their bin day. We know that about 30-odd% of the patronage at the bulk recycling facility comes from northern Wellington suburbs, so good for them as well. But it's not funded to provide for a full commercial service.
So what do the businesses do? How do they recycle?
So the businesses recycle just through their own private arrangements with private entities. So the same as what they would do with their general refuse disposal, all of their recycling. So North City, for example, will engage with one of the private commercial operators.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, David. That was great and on time, so I appreciate you. Thank you for running over. Okay, we've got Wellington Water waiting. Pat is online and Nick will come down the hallway. Someone's going to grab him. Hello, gentlemen. Come and have a seat. Okay, Nick, I'm going to hand over to you to introduce because my brain's gone and I can't remember your name. Charles, sorry. Sorry, got to be honest.
I hope you remember my name.
Yeah, yeah. And Pat's online, welcome. So I'm going to hand it over to you and then we'll go to questions when you're ready.
Well, kia ora koutou, councillors, and thank you very much for the opportunity to come and engage with you today. I've got Charles Barker here with us, and Charles is the Chief Operating Officer for Wellington Water, and Pat Doherty is obviously online, Chief Executive. And we will all have something to say to you, and obviously we'll very open to questions. But I want to begin by apologising again to you. We were here last year, obviously, to apologise for the budgetary failure that occurred when the LTP budgets were being put together. And it's quite, I think, important to go back to that because these are actually related issues. One couldn't have happened without the other. The discovery of the budgetary failure led to significant questions in the organisation, staff actually coming up and effectively whistleblowing about deficiencies in process and controls and systems, and that has led obviously to change in the executive team. Pat became the chief executive in September, and a further process of discovery. And that process of discovery brings us here to you today because we've put out to everybody where Wellington Water needs to improve, where we haven't performed, and we're also going to talk to you about, we're going to give you a bit of detail about, in terms of Porirua projects, where what's what, the lay of the land, and also how we're improving the situation across the company. I mean, Wellington Water is your company. It's not some other thing. It's effectively your water department. And you need to have faith in us that we can deliver for you on behalf of residents and ratepayers in Porirua. And it's obviously over many years we haven't delivered as well as we should. And it's become clear, I think, culturally in the organisation that we need to improve, but also those systems, those processes, those controls that I've mentioned, and really critically the procurement and management of contracts and projects hasn't met your expectations as council, shareholders, and for your communities. So the board has sought to uncover fully the issues from the moment we have been aware of them. And I feel we've been upfront about those issues. And that, as I said, that started in May last year with our budget failure. I've said this is like peeling an onion. You just keep peeling layers. It's actually like cutting an onion, and the more you cut, the more you cry, because we, as I mentioned, those significant staff disclosures led to us needing to get independent reports from Deloitte, which looked at the finance function for the organisation. It also looked at risk around those functions, but then looking at value for money with AECOM, giving us a report that showed that we're actually paying too much for a lot of the operational, particularly, but also some of the capital projects. And so what we've done, a new chief executive started in the form of Pat. He made changes where we knew they needed to be made from the get-go. At the same time, we've also had to uncover and discover. So it has been a case of improvement and discovery. The other thing that I would say is we are all, I think everybody in this room is working to having the best organisation to hand over to a new water entity, and that remains the board's real focus, and I know that's something that's shared by councils. So the way Wellington Water has worked for years has been unsatisfactory, and behaviour and culture has led to poor results, and we haven't been able to secure value in big chunks of the work that we've carried out on your behalf and that you fund. As I said, Charles will give you some detail on the Porirua projects. There has been, I think, a concern. Well, it's not a concern. It's been represented in public that every dollar spent by Wellington Water, every ratepayer dollar, has in some way ballooned and been sort of 2 or 3 times more than it should have been. That is not true. And so we want to give you some perspective on that today. We can't exactly quantify with you where things sit exactly, and I think a sort of a looking over the shoulder exercise is not particularly worthwhile, but we do need to demonstrate where we're getting value for money now. And so Wellington Water spent about $450 million last year, and it's our duty. I think Charles just said, I hope Charles doesn't mind me repeating before we went in, that the previous culture of the company was that success was measured in how much we spent. It was getting money out the door. Now, some of that was really good because we got projects built. And so, I'm not ashamed of the delivery that Wellington Water has done on your behalf. I think we can look back over years and actually see really good projects and really good progress. And, that we've talked about the leaks here. I mean, that's an operational response. The problem still remains under the ground, but we've shown we can deliver. But what we've been doing is introducing a competitive tension in the commercial relationships that we hold. And that's something that we're actively working on. It means that we have to temporarily slow the rate of work going out, and that's hurting contractors who are already hurting because there's less money in the system and there's just less work in a constrained economy. But we will, in fact, we can already show that approach is getting better value for money, particularly in the capital, in the renewal of pipes, and we've got a bit of an example. Part of it is being more pragmatic with the way we allocate risks in the contracts that we let. And what we've done is the organisation, culturally very risk averse, worried because it's exposed on all fronts, has really said we don't want risk involved in the work that we do. We're going to hand that over to contractors and consultants. Well, guess what? Guess who pays for that? So Pat and Charles and the teams are doing that's something it takes time to turn around. But we had an example a couple of weeks ago where a council came to us and said, look, you've got a job that's been tendered at 2.6 million. We've had somebody come and say to us, you're paying too much. And so Charles went and had a look at that, and unfortunately the tender had been signed, but sat down with the contractor and went over it. And the contractor said, look, we've priced risk into this in a really, more than we should have. And so we actually were able, when we understood that, to bring that contract down, save, I think, about $600,000. So a really significant chunk. And so my invitation to you is to if you've got those concerns as a council or with your staff, ask those questions. As a result, we're rewriting our contracts, and we're doing this knowingly. So we are taking more risk. It's not just easy street, right? We can save money on the contract, but we will be carrying more risk as an organisation. That means empowering staff to better manage and understand the jobs that they are working on, and that, as I say, that is a cultural issue, and that takes time as well. But the other thing that sort of fits into this is the avoiding the over-designing of work. So we're working to recruit more in-house project managers, so that means less reliance on costly consultants, and we can act more as a smart purchaser, have more intelligence and capability in-house to really drive those projects and get that value for money. And we think about, so last year, Councillor Philo, Councillor Leggett and Taku Parai and I went and talked to a contractor doing some work at Takapuahia, and the contractor was very direct about the fact that he felt there'd been an over-design in the work, that he as a contractor could have done a lot of that. It was a simple replacement of water pipes. I mean, not simple, but you know what I'm saying. It was straightforward. And I mean, that's another way that Wellington Water at times, has probably not, perhaps taken a little bit more risk, but simplified and got work out the door faster. So we can save money on time, we can save money potentially in some projects on design, and that's something that we will be doing as well. We need to achieve better economies of scale. This will happen with a new organisation being able to build out its funding. And, obviously as an asset owner, we'll be able to fund, we hope, more, make longer term decisions and group projects together. And we will be able to offer more certainty about the type and quantity of work becoming available. This will help contractors invest, gear up, have certainty that work is coming and that they can meet it. And of course, we're very much at the opposite end of that continuum at the moment. That is a wider cycle challenge, and it's a problem being faced around the country for contractors, not just in water. So that's something that it's something that we have to tackle nonetheless. The last thing I just want to talk about is this is a bit of a bugbear of mine. I think you were probably told, your staff were probably told, we can't benchmark, we can't compare costs with Wellington Water, how much it costs to lay a pipe or to replace a water main or do whatever with other councils in the country. And when we were in that period where staff were coming to myself and to Charles as the acting chief executive at the time, they were saying, well, that's actually rubbish, that's nonsense. And so we've got a whole lot of benchmarking that's happened and will continue to happen. And that will just give you that reassurance that not only, has Wellington Water in some parts paid too much, but actually it will give you the confidence, I hope, that the changes we've made are making a difference and that you're getting better value for money. So I will hand over at that point to Charles, and Pat can feel free to jump in at any stage. But do you want to take questions now, Madam Chair, or at the end?
It's up to you. I've got people's names down. I'm watching their heads write their questions.
Okay.
Do you want to continue on, Charles?
Kia ora. I just thought I'd delve into a couple of the operational matters pertinent to Porirua. Nick touched on the thing that was in the media, which is 3 times the expense. That was a misuse of that graph. What the ACOM, when they put that graph in, is they were expressing that for every kilometre that we have of network, we have to do 3 times the activity. We're repairing that 3 times as often as other places. So the cost is 3 times comparative to other councils whose networks are in better condition. So it was a measure of activity that got taken by the media and was used to start that narrative that we were spending 3 times as much. We were, but it's not 3 times as expensive per job. We're doing 3 times as many jobs. There's another graph that's the planned maintenance. Our planned maintenance ratio in our network is extraordinarily low. That is not a good thing. Those graphs should be more balanced. And so at the moment, probably in Porirua, we're spending 80% of the OPEX on reactive maintenance and only 20% on planned. And that is one thing that graph was trying to demonstrate, that is not a good place to be. And this year, looking forward into next financial year, that ratio is the same. So that's really important. And what does that cue us to? Is we haven't got much left in that planned maintenance before we will be spending 100% of all the OPEX just patching. And that is called network runaway, and we're in a really fragile state. That's what that graph was trying to attract. Superficially, if you put it up, it does I can understand how people could seize on it and think we're 3 times as expensive, but that's what that graph was trying to demonstrate. I know I won't steal Pat's thunder, but he does and it's a really good illustration, that this is the best day we'll have for 15 years today. It'll take us 15 years, if all the money gets turned on, to catch up, grow, get ahead of the backlog, get ahead of the leaks, start a renewal, grow by 30% each year. That's the most optimistic pathway. It will take us 15 years to get back ahead. We are we're renewing almost no pipes. And that's so the age of the network just continues to age. If you rip new pipes, the age of the network comes down and you get it back into a healthy space. Next year, across the entire region, we'll lay maybe 9 kilometres. And that's not 9 kilometres in a straight line. That's 20 metres here, that's a patch here, that's all pieces coming together. So that is incredibly expensive way to renew pipes. That's why I think at the Reform and Things offers an opportunity to to do that on a larger scale over a larger time, offer contracts which to our contractors which extend over multiple years, which we can't do now. That's how you start driving down your costs per kilometre. I think the other thing that I think you would want assurance of is the value for money. So how much have we spent that we didn't need to spend? If I look at this year, 73% of your CapEx was spent on this year was spent on the Porirua Central Wastewater Storage Project, the big tank. That is tendered. That's open market tendered. All our major projects were open market tendered. So if you look at that, if you want assurance for value of money, I'll leave some of the summaries of these projects that we can demonstrate value for money on that project. And that's the bulk, 73% of your expend this year in CapEx was that project. So I would just want you to have assurance that is not the issue that we're talking about. On the small works, like if I've been given an example by my team about the Porirua reservoir, they did a subsoil drain installation. That's a very small reactive thing. Our team, we have another team there. They are very good. That's a really great example of where we've got good design knowledge, good technical knowledge in-house, because those things are so reactive that we need to know exactly what the contractor's doing, when and how. And those things get a lot of oversight. And they can demonstrate in the small that they know the costs, they come in under the engineer's estimate, and they are highly supervised. And so the small and the big, we've got covered. It's this middle ground, which is where we say the panel. We hear that a lot. That was our agreement, that middle ground, those renewals, the $1 million, $2 million contracts that would go through the panel and be assigned into the panel system. That's where and it's not to say they weren't value for money. We can't demonstrate it, and that's not acceptable, right? You should be able to always say, how can you demonstrate value for money for any of the spend? That's where our weakness is. And on Pat and Nick's direction, I've dismantled the panel. The panel doesn't exist in the previous construct anymore. We have direct relationship with all of our contractors. We no longer put out things through one consultant that contracts to another consultant. There is still a panel of contractors, but even then, we're actually going to open market tender for everything. I think the primary thing for us to do is to get smarter about the tenders, how we evaluate the tenders, and smarter at managing our own work. So if we take out the risk, take on board that, we need to have a better knowledge about what's going on so that we can tick off when a risk occurs. We can say, yes, that's valid. We accept that we will have to pay that variation. So that takes us a bit of time. And what we're not doing is we're not saying we'll stay in the old system until we can learn the new. Please tolerate for continued value for money. What we're asking you to probably do is tolerate a slowdown on our part. We won't rush the tender process. We will go to market. We will get the things up because it's more important to us to demonstrate to you that we're spending all your ratepayers' dollar wisely than to keep the tempo up. So that's something that probably will manifest in our contractors getting a bit frustrated with us, and our consultants. We're comfortable with that. They can be frustrated because for us it's the value for money demonstrating. That's the two main things that I wanted to talk about. I think higher visibility too will be given and welcomed by the council officers into the project. So we're doing those steering groups. We're making sure that there's an open invitation to council officers to attend or be part of that, especially in the ones where there's joint assets between different councils. That's really important to us. And generally, we're taking anything that's in flight. Wherever there is a contractual point or a point in the process where we can then pause it and introduce commercial tension, we will. And we've demonstrated that a number of times, more recently in Wellington City, where we recommended that we stop and take more time and go to market and go and get a better, more demonstrable cost value be able to demonstrate value. And we would rather the council say, actually, this we won't make the assumption that this is the most important bit because it's in front of a library or anything. We will invite the council to give us that direction. Actually, we would prefer to go a bit quicker on this, take a bit of risk in terms of the value, maybe just go to two vendors. So we're trying to make sure that that is visible and we include the councils in those decision making, not to shed the responsibility, but it's really important that we give you confidence really quickly that those things are living and they are happening to drive value for money into the costs.
Thank you, Charles. Pat, do you want to say anything before my list of questions come up? Because I've got a group of them. You're on mute. Yeah, you're right now.
So thank you, Madam Chair. To get the work out the door at the rate that we have been doing, we will need to eventually start using the contractors and consultant panels more than we are at the moment. But until we get that database of market prices, we won't be. And even once we start using the panels again, we will be making sure that a reasonable percentage, somewhere probably between 10 and 20%, is always put out to the open market so that we always have updated value for money, because that's the challenge we've got at the moment. But the only other thing I wanted to touch on was there was a bit of a flurry of concern a couple of weeks ago about where we were spending some of our money. We were requested for a list of our suppliers and how much we were spending with them, and we released the list of suppliers, but didn't release the numbers. And so then it turned into an exercise of looking at what sort of names were on that list. Eventually, we did release all the numbers as well, but some names were picked out. So it's interesting that list we paid in the 23-24 year, we paid our suppliers $465 million. And the names that attracted attention, we spent $35,000 with, and they were all completely explainable. But it got a little bit out of hand. I mean, one of the ones that was focused on was Bella Italia, a very good cafe restaurant just along the road from Wellington Water. It was implied that maybe we were having lots of lunches, executive lunches, but they also have a very large meeting room, and it's within walking distance. So when we want to have an off-site meeting or a meeting with a lot of people, we hire their meeting room. And yes, we would get them to give us morning tea or afternoon tea, sometimes even lunch. But that was a pretty efficient way of getting all our staff together. Another one, for example, Dive and Ski Limited. Why on earth would we be spending money at Dive and Ski Limited? Well, when we're moving chlorine drums around, our staff wear breathing apparatus, and we refill the oxygen cylinders at Dive and Ski. We had answers for all of those, and quite happy to defend them. So be assured that we're not living the high life at your expense either. So that's all I had to say. Thank you, Madam Chair. Charles did steal all the rest of my thunder.
Thank you. I'll start with my list. Mike, you're at the top.
Thanks. Hey, thanks, guys, for coming in and filling us in on all the details on that. For me, there's been a number of observations, accusations that suggest panel members were feasting at the trough with little care for ratepayers. And that's infuriating stuff if it's true. And I know that if I were a CE of any one of those companies, I'd be first out the door there to refute it or challenge the comments. I've heard nothing from any of these businesses to say, hey, come off it, we weren't doing that at all. Have any of them come out with any explanations for that?
I'm happy to let Pat and Charles talk about the operational side of that. I just want to say this. They all were working in a commercial structure set up by Wellington Water. Now, there'll be degrees of judgment, and you might ask that, but Wellington Water has to take responsibility for the way those panels were assembled and the lack of, I would say at times, controls around how work was overseen and how money was, was allocated. But at its heart, Councillor Duncan, commercial businesses have done the work. Wellington Water had allowed that to occur. We've now changed that. But I'll let Charles and Pat if they want to add anything.
Fulton Hogan did put a letter out, which I thought all councillors got. Yeah. And the contractors, yeah.
Contractors Association, whatever it's called, did as well. So we did hear from them, and I thought I'd sent it out.
Yeah, you had.
To councillors.
Yeah, my memory is short on those ones.
That's okay. You got to follow up?
Okay, yes, I do. So what struck me with the ACOM report was that it was fulsome in its advice that there was very little to base their information on in the first place. They pointed to a distinct lack of peer councils to compare the work with. And on page 11, it tells us that, like you were saying, the unplanned water supply maintenance increased threefold. But for me, that report ignored the November 2016 Kaikoura quake entirely. Now, Wellington in particular was hit probably heavier than Kaikoura was with that earthquake. That had an incredible bearing on what happened with the pipes, particularly around Wellington and further afield, but it never actually canvassed that. Did you guys ask whether that should come into the equation?
No, I think with ACOM we're taking where we are from this point on. So we were definitely focused on what we need to know to improve. But I do acknowledge, so they took basically the state of the pipe. They didn't go back and inquire into a lack of infrastructure investment over decades or those. It was very much focused on where are we at now, and what are the things that they could recommend that we do to improve. But I acknowledge what you're saying about the impact of the earthquake.
One other question. Now, from my recollection, when this panel was set up, there was a real concern in the industry that there was a hell of a shortage of people to do the work that was going to be needed over the next however many years, and that was probably a driver in the setting up of the panel. And what concerns me is when we talk about going to the market competitively, I mean, whenever you see council on a tender document, the price goes right up automatically. Because they know that councils will expect 100%. They'll want the job done spot on. So when we go competitively, what does that mean? Are they starting to cut corners? Are we going to get pipes that aren't going to be effective? That worries me.
I think one of the things that is really important to Wellington Water is that the voice of the network comes up higher into the company. And that's knowledge of the state of the asset, the design knowledge. So we need to empower the engineers that we have to be really, really efficient at looking at designs. And we set the standards that they have to build to. So there's lots of potential to take good control of that anxiety. And there's this is the best time. If we want to get good value money out of contractors at the moment, it's a very good time. The contractors don't have a lot of work. They're hungry for work, and we have work. So I'm confident that that we will be able to demonstrate value for money. And I think I like what you said, Councillor, about that. When the panels were set up, it was a very different environment. So we can't go back and say it was securing and growing the capacity in the region to sustain the demand was a really high priority. I think what we've got with the panel construct is the strength overplayed for too long. There should have been a point that we
mature.
An inflection point where we then said, now at some point someone's going to come and ask us to demonstrate value for money. Let's just start building that in.
I think Pat's wanting to jump in there.
So another thing that became apparent was that our capital projects team was working a little bit in isolation from the needs of the rest of the organisation, which is one of the reasons that we now have a chief operating officer, which is Charles, and there'll be three people reporting to him, groups reporting to him. Then that'll be network operations, treatment plants, and capital projects, so that there is a much closer link to make sure that we are getting the right work done at the right standard and not accepting a pup that we then hand on to our maintenance team.
Thank you. Josh.
Thank you. You had a few questions I wanted to work through. So my first was Nick, before you were talking about how there was some staff that came forward, essentially whistleblowing, what was the term that you used. I wonder if you could speak a little bit more to what your assessment is as to why it took whistleblowing from staff for these issues to be revealed, and in particular, but when I hear that terminology, the implication to me is that there was knowledge that existed at a low level in the organisation that somehow wasn't reaching the chief executive and the chair, and that means that information either wasn't being processed properly or potentially was even being deliberately withheld. Could you speak a little bit more to your assessment of that situation?
I mean, we should probably call them protected disclosures, but yes, I would say whistleblowing because we all understand what that means, right? And so we did have a formal process around disclosures, which was handled properly, and then there was some informal, whistleblowing that occurred. Councillor Trillin, you've actually just described exactly in your question what I believe was had the culture that had been commonplace at Wellington Water. And Charles is next to me. He has been there for 4 years. He might, he's nodding. Became pretty clear to the board, and Pat was on the board, and of course we subsequently appointed him chief executive, that information didn't reach the board. And I've talked about culture and needing to improve culture. That is one of the ways that we've actively sought to do that. So the board, and it's part of it is the board also understanding where risk lies and where concerns are and asking questions in those areas. But ultimately it's where you have confidence that you're being told everything. And I do have that confidence now.
Thank you. Further to that, was your assessment in going through that process that this was a case of a full system-wide cultural issue across the organisation versus a couple of key points, potentially roles held by key individuals? Are you able to speak a little bit more to that?
It's good. It's a good follow-up question. It's both. It was both. I mean, I'm obviously not in the organisation. I know what I see. I know what I'm told. Pat might have a better ability to answer. I mean, he's mentioned just before that there's a project team working, and very much in isolation. Now bringing that back together, so there's sort of cross-pollination. It's movements like that make that difference. But as I said, a company that was never right-sized, a company that is under full public glare, a company that therefore becomes very risk-averse in the way it operates, and then a culture of not wanting to share bad news, and the one that is obviously we've heard a lot of learned helplessness. This is all part of a big melting pot of problems. And I'll let Pat, if he's got anything else to say on that.
It is interesting. My observation would be it was a culture driven from the top. And people say, oh, you're doing a great job now of driving change. I'm not really. All I'm doing is giving a lot of people the ability to do the job the way they've wanted to do it for a long time.
Thank you. So further to that, and understanding, obviously there'll be some things that you're not able to get into, Pat, and in particular, we don't expect to get into conversations around your individual employment situations and things like that. But for members of the public, because this is the most common thing we're hearing about at the moment, that are saying, what is Wellington Water actually doing? Like specific actions that can give us some confidence back. Are you able to speak to some of the specific actions that you're taking as the chief executive that give you confidence that we aren't going to see further surprises like this down the line?
So far, we have restructured the organisation into a more orthodox structure so we can make decisions faster. The whole structure was incredibly complicated. It was deliberately set up so that no one GM could make a decision about anything. So we ended up with, so normally to make a decision on something big, you would need 2 or 3 GMs in a room, and if they didn't achieve complete consensus, then they would meet again. And normally they would probably have one senior staff member each with them, and then they'd agree to meet again, which would take another 2 or 3 weeks to get them back in the room with their diaries being busy. And if they didn't achieve consensus, then it would come to the senior leadership team, and those meetings would last all day. So we should change that very quickly, so that now we have a conventional pyramid system where decisions are made and we move on more quickly. And at least 2 of my senior staff have said they estimate that's given them back about a day a week of going to meetings where very little progress was made. Certainly, we've encouraged people to speak up. We are giving advice to councils and standing by our advice. Even the PwC report that was reported to the Wellington Water Committee a couple of weeks ago, that was some of our less senior staff that pointed out there was another report in the organisation that I wasn't aware of, but they came and told me about it, and we published it. And I think that, and the board also decided that was a very positive sign. We have reset the consulting and contractor panels. We have taken 35 staff back out of the alliance so that we're better able to hold them to account. We've restructured our finance team. We're introducing KPIs for the alliance for Fulton Hogan for the first time ever. And we're introducing improved financial controls. When I outlined all the things we wanted to do, I was told that would take 6 to 9 months, and I had to say, well, I was thinking Friday. So we compromised by the end of February, and there has been a huge amount of pressure on the organisation to make all those changes. And I have to say, there's a lot of very tired people. To get all that through has not been easy at all. And now we're starting to support people as they adapt to different ways of working. I mean, we have people in our projects team that are now having to advertise tenders and do tender evaluations. They haven't done that for 5 years. They're a little bit rusty. They need support. So, yeah, there's a lot going on. If I had more time, I could talk for hours. But yeah, there's a lot of it not happening.
Possibly the most exciting thing that I've seen is that I talked about it, but that the voice of the network has come up into the organisation. In the past, the groups would be quite siloed, and a project would forget that it's actually a control on a risk and that the network's experiencing. That's the only reason the project got generated in the first place. Something was wrong or something needed to be done to help operations. And with it all under one umbrella now, you can see the best sanitisation's visibility, and that includes internal. Everyone's can actually see what's going on, and the right conversations occur about what's the priority, what's the need, and that's driven by the needs of the network, and not the need to keep spending or achieve a capital delivery target or something like that. So it's people are really enjoying it, and I think it's that for a while there was that thwarted feeling that you can't pass judgment on each other or have an opinion, and it's just freed it up a lot.
Thank you very much. And so all of that's been very helpful. Thank you. And so I guess the really key thing for me then is, and this is probably again for Pat, but based on the actions that you have taken so far, do you have a high degree of confidence that this is the end of the unpleasant surprises? Or do you expect that there is still more work to be done and still more to be uncovered that we'll be hearing about further down the line?
I hope somewhere in that range that we have come to the end of the big surprises. I mean, as we're diving into some of the stuff, we are learning more, but it's now more operational surprises. It's things that were happening further down in the organisation that didn't have a big impact, but still need to be fixed. So I think we have, in my view, the releasing those reports was us hitting rock bottom, and from then on we're starting to climb our way back out of the hole. But one of the things that we are constrained by is how quickly we can onboard good staff. We've talked repeatedly about being less reliant on contractors and consultants, being a smart purchaser. Well, that means we need to recruit smart, experienced people, and that's slow going, making sure we get the right people. But we are on the way up.
Cool, thank you. I've got two more questions, if that's okay. So my next one was, there was a comment before, and sorry, I can't recall if it was Nick or Charles that said this, around making savings by opting to take on a bit more risk as an organisation for Wellington Water itself. Could you speak a little bit more to what the implications of that are? And in particular, does that mean, is there an increased chance that Wellington Water will be coming back to councils outside of annual plan cycles for top-ups?
No, if we do this smart, we should know the risks ourselves. We should know, we should have a good estimate of what the job is. We should know all of that internally. That's having that good knowledge of our network and good knowledge of our environment that we work in. And then when we put the tenders out, we would expect people not to bake in all the risks. And because if they do that, if they bake in that they will hit a 5-metre boulder as they deliver the pipe, then if they don't hit a 5-metre boulder, they keep the money. That's a very safe way for us to make sure that we never have an overspend. But we need we would expect them to know, these tag all those, and then we participate and come on site and check and tick off, and we agree with the engineer to contract, yep, that risk has occurred, that money goes across. The real savviness is, that's what Pat said, we need good people at the outset to do that design and estimation and make sure that when we put the budget in, the request in, that we've allowed for it. What will happen though is we'll get the opposite sometimes, is we'll be coming back saying, in fact, we don't need the money, what would you like to do with it? And that can cause other problems too. But that's a much healthier problem to have. So yeah, I can give you assurance about that.
Cool. And so just as a clarification to that, so does that mean, in terms of when Wellington Water is coming to council and saying, hey, we need X number of dollars, you will still be pricing risk into what you're giving to us, but you aren't relying on contractors to price in risk themselves? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, so we will always give you a 95% estimate.
Yeah.
Is what most councils expect us to give. And that should be pretty conservative, right? So that's the 95% chance that the cost will come in below this. Different councils do different things with what they put into their LTP. So our advice should be consistent. This is a 95% estimate, and you should be able to act with confidence that is the cost. You may make a different decision, because if you put 95% into all your LTP, it could look quite big, and it's probably not going to occur. So the money that goes into the LTP, that's a council decision.
Cool, thank you. And then so my final question was around how, and I think Charles, it was you that had spoken to this as well, around slowing down the tempo of work. And so I just want to understand a little bit more around what the implications are on that for our work program, and so in particular, two elements to that. One, does that mean it's going to take longer to fix leaks? Is that the natural consequence of that? And the other part of that is, if we're slowing down work and therefore slowing down spending, should we be reducing the amount of money that we are giving to Wellington Water through this annual plan cycle, if not as much is going to be spent?
So the leaks, that's OPEX. There's no slowing down with that. That maintenance team is part of our in-house alliance. They will crack on, and there's no concern there about a slowdown there. What we're really more talking about is that there we've introduced some more steps. So we've got the tendering process to go through, and then the valuation. We've increased our procurement strategy. They all add weeks and a couple of months to things. So it's not wholesale, we can't achieve your program. It's just that we may be coming and going, we may be coming back to you and saying, actually, it's going to take us a little bit longer to start and a little bit longer to finish. But I don't think at this stage I've had nothing back to say that there's a risk with the advice that we've given you.
Okay, cool, thank you. And so just clarifying that the slowdown is specifically in relation to CapEx investment as opposed to operational.
Yeah, and primarily that middle section of CapEx that I was talking about, those middle jobs, the big ones, we already have a process that you would a good tendering process. The urgent jobs we're onto. It's that middle batch that we would, and Porirua doesn't have that many, and so I'd be very confident that we're, while there may be some delays, what we consider delays, holistically in the program, it won't appear that way.
Pat wants to reply to that one.
And that's why I was at pains to point out that we're not moving away from the panel permanently. Once we have a better database of what market prices are, then we can enter into negotiations with panel members or seek prices from two or three of them, knowing what the going rate is. One of the disadvantages we have at the moment is we're not quite sure what the going rate is across all those areas. So that's why all the work's going out to tender at the moment. But eventually we will be moving back to probably 80 to 90% of the work going out through the panels, and we will speed up again. But some of the work we will always put out to tender to make sure we stay in touch with the open market.
Cool. Thank you. That's everything from me.
Hi, Lee.
Thank you. Thank you for coming in. I guess my frustration really is that the report wasn't a big surprise, because over the years, you know, a lot of us around this table, we've always questioned the cost and the cost of contractors and the spending and the overspending and the savings. So it didn't really come as some surprise, but I am quite happy with what we plan to be doing from now into the future, and with the new entity, who knows. Actually, Charles, you touched on one of my questions around Porirua, because I do feel like the report centred more on Wellington City failures than it did across the board. Even though we do work and own Wellington Water collaboratively, we did go out to open tender for our wastewater holding tank. Did I say that right? Yeah. And, you know, I'm quite comfortable with the 73% CapEx spent on that. So if you think about the current and the now, I think that we are being, semi-okay with what we're doing and what we're spending. You also touched on us being more reactive as opposed to being proactive. What can you ensure, what could the new entity do or ensure for us going forward for that not to happen?
I think we've touched. It's a good question. It brings together a lot of what we've talked about, but it is essentially if you think about leaks. So we've reduced the number of leaks because you've given us more money to do that. Okay, well that's great. We've reduced water loss, but we haven't dealt with the underlying problem, which is the age and the condition of the network. And as Pat and Charles have said, that network fault runaway is you're not renewing your pipes, your aged pipes, you are patching, and your reactive maintenance grows. And that's what that AECOM report actually showed. It was the reactive growth in responding to an aged or a poor network. What the new entity will be able to do is, over time, using, it owns the assets, it can make the decision on the funding, it can grow that the renewal and build every year. Pat mentioned a 30% year-on-year growth. That, so 9 kilometres of pipe replacement this year, we should be doing 100. We're not going to have a day as good as today in terms of network condition for 15 years if we get the new entity going and get it ramping up. So it can do a lot, but it is obviously, and you appreciate it's a slow ship to turn. What I would, just re-emphasise with you, and I know I don't need to do this, but I'm going to say it anyway, is put pressure to get the new entity going as soon as possible. And Wellington Water will give you the commitment of getting its house in order. So the parts of the new entity that it will transition can be as good as they possibly can be from day one, so that entity can deliver for you.
Thank you. I think that's pretty much. We also have been in a really good position with the government paying for the new Bothamley Park sewer upgrade, so thank you very much for that. Just one last thing, because we're all in the room, is that I've always said that we we own Wellington Water. We should all take responsibility for our decisions. And I just want to acknowledge my colleagues in this room, and you know who you are, have put up with a lot of nonsense online. So kia kaha, my friends.
Z.
I think pretty much my questions have been asked, but I appreciate the explanation that you've provided, especially around the, I guess, misunderstanding around the 3 times spend. And so that was good to get clarification. And sometimes it's just on how it's presented, obviously, in that table, but also appreciate the direction. So I just wanted, similar to Councillor Trillin, assurances for our end users in terms of like our residents, in your haste to get good bang for buck or value for money, that it's not going to slow down the reactive work that's required in terms of the urgency around a leak. Because the other thing around the spend for Wellington Water is the perception around your reaction time to leaks, that obviously you see it on Facebook, but also in your own backyard when things like that happen. So I think you gave assurance that that's not going to be the case.
Yeah, that's right. It's because it is an operational, not a capital spend. And I actually want to pay tribute both to the Wellington Water staff, but actually the contractors, including Fulton Hogan, who actually do get out in the middle of the night and fix jobs. And we know that because we are all connected in our communities, and have ramped up the reactive leak fixes when we've asked them, collectively asked them to do. So, look, it is a fine balance between we need to demonstrate better value for money. We have to demonstrate a new way of working for the region. That has to be balanced with we want to get the work done as soon as possible as well. So we just have to try and strike that balance as well as we can.
I know the maintenance teams were, you go visit them now, and with the extra funding that's been made available by yourselves and other councils to get on top of the leaks, they are psychologically so much happier. They've got a small backlog that they think is a thing that they can keep on top of. If you go back 18 months, thousands of leaks, and they just had to drive past them on the way to the one leak they could afford to fix. And so there was a really pivotal moment that we'll probably never go back and really appreciate, when all the councils made that proactive decision around the acute water shortage. The difference that made to our people feeling like they were worth the funding, and then they got on top of it, and that we got through last summer at only level 1 for the first time in a decade. They're in a really good space, and that makes them a lot easier to lead, and that's because of people like yourselves made a really bold decision. So thank you for that.
All right, Ross. Jeff?
Thank you, Your Worship. First of all, Charles, Pat, Nick, thank you for coming in, and thank you for leading with an apology. It's important to start the tone of that, and I think, as had been expanded upon by Councillor Trillin's comments, we don't want to have big mistakes to require you guys to keep on coming in and apologising. The performance, and I know you don't want to either, but we want our performance to be laid on the things that we are doing, not on the things that we say that haven't been done or been done after the fact. There's been a lot in this chamber. I just want to make sure that I ask a preamble before I get to my partai, because I think it's important. I think there's been in this chamber a lot of heat, potentially unhelpful heat on this issue. So my questions are going to focus on systems and not people. I want to remind everybody here that I will protect personal mana, but that doesn't mean I'm going to be asking tough questions, and they are high level. But I hope that Your Worship will allow me some latitude in some of these questions. Indeed, notwithstanding the time. I do want to point out, though, that some of my thinking about how to ask these questions has come from reading the Field Guide to Understanding Human Error by Sydney Decker. It's available on Amazon if you guys, I'm sure you've all read it already, so you know. So again, these are high-level questions. They probably have been covered in Wellington Water Committee meetings, but I think it just needs to be covered for the sake of the people in Porirua. The tension, and Nick, I think this is where you've said, the tension is well expressed. It's between the volume of delivery and the value for money. And that will remain irrespective of whatever work has been done here. And I suspect the same will be of whatever new water service delivery model that comes out of it. I'm not going to focus on the new entity. I think that that's not for Wellington Water so much as it is for us as councillors and deliberating on the new water service delivery model. So my questions are going to be about the remaining time of operation for Wellington Water as status quo. So, Pātai, here we go. Tuatahi. How does Wellington Water ensure that the whatever contract management systems it's going to put in place is going to promote genuine competition and prevent the formation of overly close relationships with contractors, which was a key concern of the panel and vendor situation?
I can give you assurance that the panel as it was, people would have varying knowledge of the panel, how we group people under groupings and things like that. So to simplify our relationship with, we only had to manage 3 that had umbrellas underneath them. All that is gone. We won't not be going back to large constructs where we group them under large into 3 main portions and all the consultants tuck in under each other. That is not going to happen. We have even the panel that we've reconstructed is direct relationships with each and introducing competitive tension between. They do not see each other's prices. We've in the past they had access to our systems because they were so heavily involved. All that's been stripped away. They can't see the cost of the money that we have. They can't see the prior costs of anyone else anymore. Those type of things. We're returning to a much more conservative thing, and I think that's what you're saying there. We're swinging. We've spent too long on the value of volume of delivery value, and we didn't build in those good metrics because it could have been possible to achieve what we need to do under the old construct, but it's too late. So now we're going across to that other side, and we can give you assurance that we will not be going back to any of that large groupings. Does that?
It does. I've got a follow-up question. So just in relation to that, and this was mentioned by Pat in terms of trying to get market testing data so as to help assist a new panel in terms of making those decisions. I haven't heard any specific timeframes around that, but surely there will be some point of inflection that senior management will have with regards to the assemblage of enough data to make decisions about a future panel process.
Pat has tasked me that in July I need to come and articulate what we've learnt from the tendering process. Are we in a position? What position are we in? Are we a well-informed purchaser that knows the cost of our business? And if not, we will keep tendering and keep going until we want to get back into panels are useful constructs. They're really valuable things to speed up delivery. But we need to make sure that we can demonstrate to all our owners during the last 14 months that potentially that we exist, that we have learnt and we are setting ourselves up well for whatever comes after us. So at this stage it's July, and then what may happen is that depending on what the direction is, maybe a percentage will start slowly increasing back into the panel, and we'll come up with a plan for that. But at the moment, I'd say we're at the first step of becoming savvy purchasers.
Yeah, getting the data. I understand that. One of the things I'm just mindful as well with regards to the composition of panels and determining those tenders of contracts. There's no discussion about losing any potential for value in so much not just the cost, but the benefit in terms of building local workforce that allows you to have that ability to build capacity for the region and dealing with these big projects. That's not being touched at all as part of this process, right?
No, but our capital program is constrained. The network has problems in many places. The trouble we have at the moment is, we signalled this to our contractors, that we're moving to a treatment plant emphasis. The same contractors can't do treatment plants that do pipes. So that's one of the things that the benefit of the new entity will be able to secure longer term investment for the contractors and help grow. But we've been, so there are some contractors that are feeling it really tough, and they have grown over the last 6 years, and now the supply that Wellington Water is giving them is diminished. And
that's partly due to capital constraint, and it's partly due to slowing stuff down. Yeah. But just to emphasise that, long-term pipeline, guaranteed pipeline, is the best way to develop local workforce, and give those companies confidence that the work is going to be there. but there is also a training and a welcoming into industry, and those things are actually those kind of things are being led by Ngāti Toa amongst others, but with active participation from Wellington Water and some of the other contractors. So, but it's scale and guarantee and clarity that gives you that.
Yeah, thank you for that. And the clarity around that. In spite of the numerous examples of the streamlining and transparency improvements that's been made as an organisation, what regular oversight and audit processes are going to be embedded to provide, ongoing assurance? Because assurances given by individuals is one thing. How is that going to be reflected in future reporting, whether it's to Water Committee, to individual councils, or what have you? What are those new features looking like?
Wellington Water does a lot of reporting, a huge amount of reporting, because we've got 6 councils, varying requirements of those councils, a lot of bespoke stuff, and underneath that is we don't have good data because we don't have systems. So we are always, we've learnt, one of the key learnings from us that are coming out of this is be careful with what we report, be accurate with what we report, and that takes time. So we have to manage this tension between giving councils what they need and in a timely fashion. So we're working with council officers to go, what are the core things? If it's the monthly finances that are the core things, we need to give us space to make sure they are accurate. We don't have our own finance system. So it's, I guess, almost perversely, councillor, it's the way we'll give you assurances by giving you less reporting, but it will be accurate, and we won't make a mistake like the corporate cost era, where we are amassing huge amounts of spreadsheets which are all flawed, and we miss something. So I think the thing that you should expect is better, easier to read reports but fewer of them, and they're accurate. And ease of access to our data is really difficult because our data is so poor and so complex. So we're trying to simplify it but make it accurate. Yeah.
Pat, you want to answer that?
So one of the things we've made very clear to our staff that if they want to accept a price for anything, either coming to the executive leadership team, to a parent council, or to the board, is if you can't talk about value for money, don't even start writing the report, and that you won't get approval. And that way of thinking is sinking into the organisation very quickly. So either demonstrate it through a competitive tender process, or demonstrate it because you can point to prices from a competitive tender process that's recently been done. So it's clearly understood throughout the organisation where the focus is.
Thank you for that. You've actually answered my next question, so I'll just move on to the next one. I think the point about uncovering, discovering, and making improvements is an iterative process, and I appreciate that. What is the Wellington Water's position around establishing red flags in terms of being able to give certainty around potential systemic issues that come up, whatever they may be, or deviations from expected performance, so that there can be timely intervention and corrective action?
I think that's probably me. So we have been looking at ourselves very closely over the last 6 months, turned over a lot of stones, and we've publicly reported them all. We have a culture now where people know it's safe to raise concerns, to raise issues. Like I said, I think we've hit the low point and are now starting to climb out of the dark place we were in. So, as Charles said, one of the challenges we do have is we have almost no IT systems at all. We don't have an asset management system, no finance system. We use Wellington City Council's finance system. We don't have a budgeting system. We rely on spreadsheets. Our document management system is end of life. Our health and safety system is end of life. we are well behind the level of sophistication that every one of our parent councils has in terms of the systems we have. So we are relying very much on the care and diligence of our staff to keep us, to warn us of issues. I have to say that certainly at a senior level and right down to third-tier managers, we are being much more cautious, much more diligent, and asking questions, which is also slowing us down as well. But we think that that is the right thing to do. We need to make sure that the new culture is bedded into the organisation and sees and so that the region sees the Wellington Water as the potential basis of a new organisation. Because one of the things we have talked about here is, the solution to all our problems is a new organisation that can send out its own invoices, borrow its own money, and deliver much larger capital works budgets. And the last thing the region needs is for the new organisation to be formed and then to start to advertise for staff and build up an organisation slowly over a couple of years. One of the things we are also looking to do is start implementing, purchasing the new IT systems and implementing them so they can be handed over to the new organisation, or at least we'll be down the track. So everything we're doing at the moment, two focuses. One is value for money, and the other thing is making sure that everything we do is focused on the future benefit of the new organisation.
You just knocked out one of my other questions as well, Pat. Well done. So noting the importance of transparency and the forthrightness of individuals within the system to come forward, which is an important point, and that makes the delineation, again, going back to DECA, between first level stories and second level stories. So there's also, I think, a narrative here that is, as public representatives, councils have in the past, or councillors, or public representatives, not just in Porirua, across the region, have highlighted concerns about these sorts of issues. And I'm trying to also ascertain whether there is an attitude within Wellington Water to reflect on that and showing that there is a capacity to learn from that, those past interactions, so that any systemic issues are being incorporated into their current and future operational practices.
So one of the things I've emphasised to our staff is we have, when I was on the board, we would see surveys of customers where we would go out to the public and survey them and see what they thought about Wellington Water, and that would be how we'd measure whether there was customer satisfaction. What I've emphasised is we have 6 customers, and they're all called councils, and that's what we focus on, making sure they are happy with our performance. So there's a lot more effort going in there, and I think that the staff at the councils would acknowledge that we are working hard to build those relationships and responding to feedback. And we had a recent example with Upper Hutt City Council where they expressed some concerns about the value of a contract, and worked with them and came up with a very good solution. That was the one about overpricing risk. That was at the basis of Upper Hutt City Council coming to us and saying they have concerns, and Charles and his team taking it very seriously. So we are working hard in those spaces. But one of the other things we are also working hard to do is regain that reputation as being a trusted advisor, and that means being respected for what we do, but not popular. So sometimes the advice we give you may not like, but you'll know that it's coming from a good place.
Before I get to my last question, Your Worship, I just wanted to give particular praise to the last point there, which is that I am not an engineer or a specialist in water technology, so I'm not necessarily going to argue the toss like I'm going to be in the Porirua Club on a Friday night. But I do think that does resonate with me, the importance of the public being able to trust Wellington Water, and that will take time, and it may take more time than the entity as it currently stands is going to be allowed to do so. Last question. So, it's been mentioned before that there will be a continued commitment to the projects that are being brought up, but it may be a time frame issue. Things may be delayed as you work through a revised process of teaching of competitive tension. Can you give some examples of the types of projects that this is going to impact in Porirua? I'm thinking stuff that may be related to the wastewater treatment plant, but can I get some certainty around those types of projects so I just know what we're talking about here?
The best examples I can give would be around when there's a point where we've got through a design phase, and in the past that would have just gone straight to the contractor because there would have been an agreement. That would be a classic point if we're laying some renewals or something that we'll go, well, stop. We haven't awarded that yet. So there's a point there where we will say, actually, that was awarded. It wasn't awarded as a contract, but earmarked to that contract under the old panel arrangement. We'll take an extra 4 weeks and put it out. And so that the main ones are in that middle ground that I talked about, where they would have been legacies coming through from the old construct of the panel, and that would be. But I can get a list of those. There's I think you've got about 9 or 10 projects that are coming up, and what I just want to give assurance is any opportunity there will be seized to introduce that. But there are some that are in flight past those points, and we will just have to work through that. But we will, even in those, come back and try and see that how can we, from an outside perspective, give some assurance about what the value of the money was for those as well.
Yes, I would like a copy of that, and thank you very much for answering the questions. Kia ora.
Kathleen?
Charles, Nick, thanks for coming in, and Pat for joining us online. Pat in particular, he spoke about the changes that he's made operational, talked about restructure, getting people to speak up, the breaking down of the panels, the KPIs with the Alliance, and just in-house tenders. So I heard all that. And what my question is, in terms of, do you have any sort of measurable or evidence about these changes having the outcomes, basically the measurable outcomes of these changes? Do you have them yet, or is this more of a July thing that you were referring to, Charles?
That's the exact question the board gave us at the board meeting, and we've given an undertaking to, we've got good examples, lots of individual examples, that we'll collate those, and maybe that's something that we can provide up to the Water Committee as evidence of that we're on the right price. This is the right path. These are the benefits we're realising already. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, so are you sort of referring to examples like the 600K savings that Nick mentioned earlier? Is that what?
Yes.
We're on the same page? Okay. So what about to the contractor that you brought up before, Nick, and his suggestion? Are those currently being implemented, or are they just being thought about, or what's the story there?
I mean, that is the, I mean, this is the, there are different components that all go into projects, obviously, and so the approach of the organisation has been quite hands-off. So, okay, we'll let the designers design. We'll let the panel decide who designs and what, and to what standard. We'll let the contractors decide how that's awarded. So it is about a far more active contractor and then project management capability within the organisation. To quantify that So that the 600,000 was an example. Oh, shivers! Actually, we're pricing risk too high, so that then gets put into that mix as well. We're only going to know that, and so it's evidence. You want evidence, and the board and the organisation wants evidence. We will have that evidence once we start to get some projects priced and then delivered. So it's why we can't benchmark adequately until we have actually undertaken projects under the new, under this changed regime.
Pat's got an answer to that. Kathleen first.
So, for example, the pricing of risk, that became apparent to us during the conversation that Charles had with this contractor in Upper Hutt. And so we discussed it and realised that, we had a problem here. And so we've asked our legal counsel to look at our special conditions of contract and trim them right back to something more like industry norms. And I've got a meeting with her in 10 minutes, as it happens, to see how we're going with that, because we are trying to fix things as quickly as we can, because we've realised that there's no point going out to tender if our tender documents are so conservative that we're still not getting competitive prices. So we're moving very quickly on a lot of fronts, and at the same time trying to keep work going out the door, and at the same time support a very large IT implementation project, and also engage with the transition team setting up the new water company. So there is a lot of pressure on the organisation from a lot of places, but people, like I said, they've wanted these changes and they're embracing them and they're enthusiastic. They're tired but enthusiastic.
Our contractor, the variations were pretty intimidating. Our general counsel's got a really strong infrastructure background, and she was saying you will push. You won't get some people tendering. You won't, because if you're a small company, looking at that pile of documentation and the thing, it will be so intimidating that they'll just go, I can't. The bar's too high. And so that's another really important thing, is you've got to lower and the new entity will be able to have flexibility, like put out smaller packages of work, big packages, allow all scale of businesses to have access to what the Wellington water work too. That's another way to get really good, healthy competition, because sometimes small is cheap. Yeah.
Okay, so thanks. So just to kind of round that up, yes, there will be proof of measurable outcomes, but it's coming with these new contracts that haven't sort of, what's the kind of time frame?
New contractual approaches, so the dismantling of the panels, new contracts, new internal capability building and attitude to value for money and to projects. And so it is it's not a simplistic push the button and it all changes. There are many different facets to it, and you'll appreciate that. So, Charles, you're in a better position operationally to judge, but it's sort of July is when you're hoping to get some sense.
And it's not to say that either that any of the contractors were charging too much. It's just we couldn't demonstrate the value. So I'll use there's a pipeline we're putting under a river in South Wairarapa. We paused that. We had it assigned to it. We paused it, put it out to tender. 2 good high-end contractors came in. The tenders were within, be careful now, I don't know, we're close. And that allowed us to make a really good decision, but it also gave that council confidence that that was a fair price. Otherwise, we just go one and we go, oh, we'll trust them as though we know them, they won't be ripping us off. That assurance lasts about 5 minutes. It's much healthier if we can come to you and go, so are we, it's not always that we're going to be able to save money, but we'll be able to demonstrate that it is good value for money. Yeah, and I think that's what we'll be able to come back and say, we've done this series of tenders, this is what we've learnt from the tenders, and this is, so you can have confidence that that price is a good market competitive price.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's really good to hear that there are changes that are being made, they're being worked through, and I guess I just want to, and it's good to hear that these outcomes will be measured, because that's really what we need is to see, it's great to have the promises, but we do need the proof. So I'm looking forward to seeing those outcomes measured. And did you say in the committee meeting to the mayors, is that where it will be?
It'll come to the board first, and then, so it'll be, but I mean, if you recall, I started off by talking about the fact that Wellington Water didn't want to or was incapable of benchmarking despite being asked for, so we're now working ourselves, and that's about evidence, right? So we're now in a position of working, getting to a point where we are going to be able to provide you with cost comparisons with other councils, with market, and to do that effectively, we've got to take all the steps that we've outlined.
Cool. So, Charles, thanks as well for talking a little bit about Porirua. I was hoping to get a bit more detail about that, but what I heard you talk about was our CapEx spend, which obviously is at the storage tank, majority of it, and I heard you speak about the OPEX being a great chunk of it. And I just want to acknowledge as well, it wasn't too long ago we had that big geyser in Titahi Bay, maybe a month ago, and the Wellington water truck was there pretty quickly. And it was handled quite fast in terms of the traffic management and all that. So, that is something that is obviously needed in our city. In terms of that middle ground, though, that you're talking about, is this more renewals of pipes? This part that's not quite quantified yet in terms of benchmarking. So
the example that they gave, my team gave me was Prosser Street Water Main Renewal Project. That's a middle costing. That was awarded under the old panel agreement, and that's something that we will have to go in and kind of try and make an assessment about the value for money, because that would be a classic example of we would go, it was going to be built really well, really, really effectively, the quality is going to be great, but if you said, how do you know that was a good price, that's where we fall short from the old legacy things. So it's some of those things. That's where I think you'll see the biggest improvement. Am I answering your question there?
So I'm glad you brought that up. So that particular project, are you going to look at that and see and sort of give a bit of an analysis of it in terms of, is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So where there isn't a point in that project that we can kind of where there's the most clean gap is when there's a phase that's finishing and we have the option to put out to tender the rest of the phases, or maybe there's the design and we haven't awarded the build. We'll take all those opportunities, but where there's not, we'll be going through, like here, how did we at the time make an assessment of value for money? Can we show that to you to give you confidence that there was some oversight of the cost? And then also what can we do? Maybe we can look at a tender for a similar project and then look at this one that we're at the whole older one and go, oh, actually the rates look about the same. We're probably okay, because I don't think it's not a holus bolus. I don't think it's fair on the contractors to have it implied that they were holus bolus, pigs like in a trough. They just had a lot of risk baked in. The cost looks high, and we could have been savvier and smarter.
And they were.
I'm just going to interrupt you both because I think Pat actually has 11:30 and he has to leave us. You want any final word, or are you just happy? Thank you for joining us. I know you've got 2 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, but I will have to drop off. But thank you for the conversation, and thank you for the positive approach from you and your council. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, Kathleen, back to you. Sorry.
I think Charles was still talking.
Well, sorry, he had to leave, so I...
So I think that comes down to, what I can come back with is the current projects in flight. I can come back with a document that gives a level of assurance about what activity we did to check for value for money, and also what assurance we can provide about the value for money in hindsight.
What's sort of the timeframe when we'll see that information come back?
So it's a little bit of months, because to have something to compare it to, we need to go through the tender process of enough like for like. But the actual confidence that I can give, so in a shorter time frame, I can come back and give a summary of the type of value for money checks that were done. I'm going around in circles. So I think that's the same question I had again about do you want a bit more of a wholesome breakdown of that middle section, and I'll include that in there, and I can turn that around relatively quickly.
Cool. And is that what you're doing across the region with the other councils as well? Sort of,
If they ask for it,
Okay.
it's just more reporting. Yeah, but it's important. That's an important one.
Yeah, I think it is, because if the failure isn't really investigated, then it just goes more underground.
Yeah, and I think you're left with a lingering question and a doubt, and that's not helpful for us. Yeah.
I just had a couple other final questions, and it was around the IT asset management system that you're proposing, particularly with the procurement. Have you put some procurement safeguards in place for this, or have any cheaper or staged options been considered? Has there been a business case? Just wanted to get a general gauge about that.
I mean, we've got quite a, as you would expect, quite a robust structure to not just procurement, but project governance, to getting the right expertise and working closely with shareholders, and indeed, I think the chief executive will correct me, but the connection to the AOG, to the new entity, and I suppose the one key message from me there is that we're not looking to a sort of a root and branch design. These are off the shelf solutions, so they're not. It's not about highest cost, and there's a big contingency built in, but we've got, it's emerging. Obviously, there hasn't been a confirmation of funding yet. We're hopeful, but the Greater Wellington still has to confirm that. And we will report back to the shareholding committee about progress regularly.
Any final questions, Kathleen, or is that it?
No, I think that's it. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Nick and Charles. Awesome. And Pat, well, I've said thank you to him when he left, but there's no final questions, is there? No. Thank you very much for joining us. We are now going to have a break, so we'll come back at 10 to 12 to cover the Freedom Camping Bylaw. The others have gone. So we're back at 10 to 12. Okay, welcome back, everybody. We're online again. We're here for the Freedom Camping Bylaw update. Handing over to you, Nick.
Yeah, it's a bit of a long haul morning. No, all good. Look, it's not typical that we would bring you a workshop in between going out for consultation and then bringing a deliberations paper back to you. And I guess the reason for doing this is because a couple of you have raised questions and expressed views upon hearing from our community. So we thought actually the best thing to do is to put those thoughts on the table, do some further analysis, bring that conversation to you so that you can debate what you think is the right way forward. We can present you with the information from that, and then we will bring a deliberations paper and proposal from there. So not the usual way we do things, but in this case, it's a topic that's important to get right. We bring it through. So over to Matt again.
Perfect. Thanks, Nick. I'm going to keep my comments really brief because I know it's been a long morning. So, and then we'll just open up for questions. Like Nick says, it's just a refresh of the options and the relevant legislation for freedom camping in Porirua. We're not making decisions today, as you know. That will be for deliberations on the 12th of June. We are very keen to hear your thoughts on any aspect of the presentation that was provided to you. So we're happy to take any questions. I'm not going to go through the presentation. I'm just going to open it up for questions straight away because...
Thank you. I'll start.
Yeah.
I don't usually start, but while I'm still not coughing, sorry, with the air temperature in here. I really wanted to know how on earth we went out with some of these things, especially Terrace Road, Ocean Parade, Bedford Court, even around the inlet. The health and safety on them, just with cars going down to the beach and turning and everything else, I wondered how they even got on the paper, because all we did was aggravate people and they were never going to go anywhere. When you saw the fire department and people like that consultating on it, and camper vans going down Ocean Parade, it's just about impossible to get a truck down that road. So I really want to know how we actually got there, because I don't think we should have put them out to start with.
So for some of them, there probably were some things we should have noted from the start. I think Bedford Court, we got feedback from the groups around there around the antisocial behaviour. Amongst the group that shortlisted this, we just weren't aware of some of that, and so that consultation served to give us that backing. Ocean Parade is tricky in that there's already a restriction in place for vehicle length. The proposed freedom camping site would be for smaller vehicles. I think the concerns from the residents there is totally understandable. There is a difficult kind of distinction between the road and whether or not allowing freedom camping vans there would pose an additional risk. In our considerations for deliberations, we're considering whether a seasonal restriction would mitigate that, where if we don't have it occurring at the same time as the summer peak, would that be an acceptable compromise there? Would that still allow for freedom camping? At Terrace Road, there was the main issue raised there is around the cliff. We didn't undertake a comprehensive health and safety review of the sites prior to consultation. Part of the reason for that would be around the cost of doing so and the fact that the intent behind consultation was for issues like this to be raised. And so now that we've had that made clear, I think we can consider that in the final recommendations.
I think we've probably learnt from that actually we shouldn't be putting anything out unless we've put a health and safety lens over it. And the flip side to that is we don't have anyone to go out and enforce this. So if there's no enforcement officers, why are we even doing it? So if we haven't got people that go out at the weekends and people can control this, you said, winter and summer, different things, there's no point having these rules.
So I can talk to the enforcement side of things. We did a bit of analysis on this in preparation for the workshop. So right now with the current team, we would be responding to complaints only, and we'd be making effective monitoring as do it as well as we can with the staff we've got. But you're absolutely right, with the current resourcing, we couldn't monitor it effectively in terms of going there on a daily basis to check who's been there for 3 days, etc. If we were to, there's two options. One is we could do a complaint-based and involve seasonal after-hours monitoring, and we can do that on two ways. One is using the contractor we currently use for doing noise, and that would cost around 60 grand per annum to operate a system like that. If we use staff, we would need one FTE in addition to what we currently have, estimated around 100 to 120k per annum. So that's what we'd be looking at if we did implement full enforcement.
Okay. Kathleen?
I'm just going back to the initial point that the Mayor was making. Can you just clarify, was it more of a desktop sort of exercise to identify these sites, or was it council staff that put these forward, or did we get consultants or contractors to do it?
So we outsourced this to Thrive Spaces and Places, who have done similar work for other councils, and their initial colour was desktop, based on sites that just could not possibly support freedom camping. From there, they went out to every potential site in the city, including the ones that were made the final list of chosen sites, and assessed them. That included health and safety, but it was not perhaps a thorough, complete health and safety review. For them to do that at that stage, they were looking at dozens of sites. So at that stage, it was really just a on-site immediate hazards. And for whatever reason, the cliffs at Cheris Road weren't flagged by them as significant risk.
Can you just clarify the cost of those, of this company? Has that come out of the proposed government funding for this bylaw?
Yes, that was part of the funding we received went to that.
So if we don't go ahead with the bylaw as proposed, and there was talk about the funding having to given back to government, what kind of a loss are we looking at there?
Yeah, so MB haven't said they will require the money be returned. We're making an assumption that because it was given to us to create a bylaw, they would ask for it back. But if they were, roughly about 50,000 has been spent of that on that review and legal reviews of our bylaw and process.
Can I interrupt you there? Because they're not even a Wellington-based company, are they?
No, I don't believe so.
Sorry, Kathleen.
No, that's fine. Yep. That was another question of mine.
Oh, sorry. Grumpy Mayor. Are you still going, Kathleen? Sorry. No, Mike.
Yeah, I'm surprised with the paper that you put through that only Poto hasn't been included as one of the areas that's ideal. I mean, it probably lends itself to freedom camping better than most places around the city, and yet, I mean, it has toilet facilities there and all, yet it's been dropped off.
Yes, so the current freedom camping site by the rowing club, that was one of the sites that Ngāti Toa objected to as a site of significance, which is why we had not included it in the proposed sites.
No, not necessarily by the boating club. If you go further in, there is car parking area there that's used regularly by freedom campers and buses and all sorts of parking there. So I don't understand why that area hasn't been considered.
That whole area would have been objected to, Mike.
Really? Right through?
So.
It's quite a big space.
Okay. Well, it just strikes me as the most logical.
Josh.
Cheers, thanks. Yeah, I had two main points. So one, first of all, around Mosu Karaka point, I think the suggested recommendation of moving in the direction of allowing it, that makes sense. The submissions that were received, it seemed like there was a lot of support for freedom camping there. So just wanted to say I think I agree with what looks like the direction of travel there. The other one was just clarifying around Ocean Parade. So my recollection of the submissions was that there were two key concerns, and you've identified and addressed one of them, being the summer rush. The other one, though, was the general safety around accessing it, and we had a number of submissions who talked about just the size of the vehicles coming through from Freedom Camping, the turning circle that currently exists in order to be able to get down there, and that doesn't seem to be addressed by this. I just wonder if you could speak to that particular concern. Is that something we've looked at?
Yeah, so it's one of the quirks of the Freedom Camping Act is that we can say you can only come down here with a smaller vehicle like a traditional van converted to a camper van. So the question is, does that present significant risk? I think most of the submitters were envisioning the large camper vans coming down, and there's a reasonable, understandable argument to be made of like, well, if it's a Freedom Camping site, they're just going to come down anyway. But under the Freedom Camping Act, that wouldn't be a valid reason to stop it. They would say, well, you have the power to infringe these vans when they come down, so that's really on you. It's the same with people saying, oh, there's no toilet block there, so people are just going to dump waste. That's a reasonable concern of residents, but the Freedom Camping Act wouldn't see that as a reason not to allow freedom camping. They would say you have the power to infringe people that are doing this, therefore that falls to you to manage. And so what we've weighed up is, by having the rules in place, that's only small vans, not big camper vans coming down, does that risk still exist there? And we're leaning towards no.
Okay, cool, thank you. Just a clarification around the potential suggestion of a variable approach based on the season, and potentially just saying no during the summer. Because I don't recall that as being an option that we talked about before. Is that something that other councils do, and do we know if it works? And in particular, so I know when you're doing things that aren't the same rule applies all the time, that the increase of confusion can go up a bit. So do we have any examples we're looking at of where that's been effective?
I'm not aware of any.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any other examples, but it's definitely something we can do. We can come back to you for deliberations on that.
Yeah, that would be really useful. Just to have some clear evidence around making that decision.
Sure.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's everything from me for now.
Kylie.
Thank you. I was just going back to the enforcement issue that we were talking about before, and with a lot of the submissions there, enforcement was obviously quite a topic for many of them. But also I just wanted to focus on Ngāti Toa Domain, because I know for a fact, well, we all know that the iwi would prefer us not to have freedom camping there, but do understand that it has been in place there for some time, and not 100% against it. But I'm just wondering if there are, with the enforcement, with the team or Recon, is it Recon? Yeah. Do they go out to more popular spots like Ngāti Toa Domain more often than they would any other spot, or how does that work? Because I can, just as an example of going to Ngāti Toa Domain almost every day in the summer, you have people that have been there for weeks. So, the other day I went and I'm not, I'm not a, I'm not a Mrs. Mangle. We're going to ring up every 5 minutes and complain about these people, because this is what our enforcement people should be doing. But, they have chickens outside their freedom camping thing and things like that. There's kind of got to be this fine line between, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, what can be, or the education that we can give people around freedom camping in our significant sites like Ngāti Toa Domain.
Thanks, Kylie. We mostly respond by complaints. So when we were getting lots of complaints at Motorkaraka Point, we were spending an inordinate amount more time there. So it is very complaints-based. In saying that, though, the parking and bylaws team regularly check they focus on parking in the suburbs on a daily basis. And so they will, if there's, they will check Ngāti Toa Domain and some of those places en route. They've still got their eyes wide open around that. So in fairness, though, it's mostly complaints-based, and I guess higher priority areas of which Ngāti Toa is one. Yeah. Can I just say too while I've got the microphone? We brought this to you to try to balance the enforcement tools we had with the appropriate places for people to freedom camp. And I guess the key message was the freedom camping legislation is permissive, but it comes with enforcement powers. To not have the freedom camping is less permissive. We can get much more into the nuances of a site, but we have less enforcement powers. And that's essentially our trade. So you gave us that mandate to go out and test that with the community, which one is better. Unfortunately, we can't pick and mix. If we could pick and mix, we would. We'd have the enforcement with the flexibility to choose the sites and implement more nuance-based rules around the sites. We don't have that luxury, and I guess that's the guidance we're looking for, is what's the right trade, I guess. That's the challenge here. I take the health and safety points on board, and the learning is we would do that more rigorously next time round for sure. I think there's some ants we could have perhaps removed by looking at that in a bit more detail, so absolutely take that feedback on. But I guess you don't have to go ahead with the freedom camping bylaw, you don't.
Oh, that's what I wanted to know.
Yeah, you don't have to.
We are the only council in the region doing it, aren't we? Everyone else is no.
I think that's correct.
Kapiti.
Kapiti is,
That's fine, but I'm saying, okay. I've got Jeff next. Had you finished? Yep, Jeff.
Thank you for coming and participating in this workshop. And yes, I was one of the individuals who emailed my concerns about the process moving forward. My focus is going to be, yet again, on process. So I have, as the nature of a workshop, there are no decisions. This isn't a secret meeting. There are no decisions. We'll come back to that at the end. But I do want to get an understanding here, because it came up in one of the previous responses, that certain individuals weren't, in effect, in the room when it came to the review and establishment of the initial proposal that came to council for consultation. So how does something like that happen in terms of, certain individuals not knowing pieces of information? Can someone give me some commentary around that, and in particular, how we're going to resolve those types of issues for any other type of engagement of this type?
Is that in terms of council officers maybe not being in the room, or outside external?
I'm using the response came that said some people weren't aware of information that had come as a consequence of the engagement process. I'm using the phrase "in the room" so much to say that everybody who is in a capacity as officers or providing guidance to decision makers like ourselves, that everybody's on the same page, everybody's consistent in their approach, that everybody's playing to the same rule book, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so we had a broad cross-council group on this discussing the sites, and there were a lot of sites where that knowledge of what has happened at these sites came into our decisions. For whatever reason, some of those sites, I think Bedford Court is particular, where just we did not realise some of the extent of the antisocial behaviour around there, and so we'll certainly in the future try and make sure we are capturing all these kinds of things in the initial discussions. But yeah, there was a officer-based discussion of the sites. It wasn't a case of some groups got invited to contribute and some not.
Okay. I guess, yeah, just to remind...
And we now have open workshops.
Yeah. So, quite right. Noting as is demonstrated in the presentations at every stage of this process, the tension between permissive and enforcement, which you've adequately described, Nick, would require officers in preparing this material to have effectively a bespoke assessment matrix. Now, I understand that was in place for the deliberation of recommending certain sites. Do officers have any reflections on the robustness of that matrix?
I think having never done this before, we were reliant on the contractors and their view of most appropriate way of running it. I think overall it was quite effective at narrowing down the list of potential sites. But having gone through the hearings, I think there were some things that were missed.
Following to that point, while the legislation again is permissive and would have to have very good reasons for a site to not be included, I would have thought that the test of health and safety would be a very high one, lest it puts us in a body that would be liable for any issues, that we would not in good conscience make a prudent decision to allow those sites, understanding that there were potential health and safety risks. Is this the kind of lesson that we can take from this type of situation in future consideration?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. I know that there's been a request for some commentary around the direction of travel on this work here. So I'm not going to give any guidance on the direction of travel with regards to the revisions of any recommendations. That's for us to deal with when we get to the substantive component. I can give some guidance in the decision-making process, which I've tried to ascertain through the questions I've asked already. But I do think this needs to be made clear right now. Anyone who is reading the documents that were prepared for this workshop, which is open, and seen what had happened during the submission process and the initial proposal, should be left with no doubt that the public have made their voices known and have had an impact, a significant impact.
Yep.
And I think that narrative should not be lost in this process. People try to think and have accused this council in emails and social media posts and face-to-face and what have you. This accusation that this is a box-ticking exercise. The reason why we go out to public consultation is to test this stuff. So while I am not here to have a go at any individual involved in this process, and I've made that clear in my initial email, our process must be robust. But in terms of the outcome, it looks like the public have been able to make an impact on it. Kia ora.
Turn the page off is what I would say. Izzy?
Yeah, no, I feel like it's been covered pretty much.
I don't know how you can follow there.
What can I add? Any value? Okay, so when Councillor Duncan mentioned Onipoto, and then the Deputy then said Kylie's fine. Councillor Wehapi said Ngāti Toa, and that Ngāti Toa would most likely not want people freedom camping on Ngāti Toa. But then it was said that they opposed Onipoto. Who decides?
So the letter we got from Ngāti Toa laid out the sites where they had sites of significance where they would not be comfortable with freedom camping. That included Motukaraka, Onipoto, and Ngāti Toa Domain. The subsequent discussions we had was that while they don't support freedom camping in Ngāti Toa Domain, they understand that it is a large site, our most popular site, and that it may not be feasible to ban it there.
So I can add to that question. So we had a robust conversation with the GM who's responsible for that element, and I guess we debated the merits of how the site's used versus the cultural values. And actually, through that conversation, there was a recognition that, it's a really big ask to think about for cultural reasons, stopping a lot of other recreational use for that site. So I guess it was a meeting in the middle of minds. And then ultimately, actually, I make the call on what advice we bring to you, and you make that final decision. But it's that step. You have that debate, you land on what the best judgment is based on all the values coming into the site for the community, and then we bring that to you. Luckily, Ngāti Toa did sort of come to that same place themselves. Yeah, they did.
So have we learnt going forward that using a contractor out of the area who doesn't come and check these spots won't happen again?
Yes, Mayor Baker, we've learnt that.
Thank you. Yes, Jeff.
This is a quick question which I think may help to, beyond this issue of freedom camping. Oh, sorry, Ross. Hey,
that was
my
for
apologies.
Me.
I thought I had rudely interrupted.
No, you hadn't. That was for me.
Okay, so notwithstanding that all of this, the take is around freedom camping, and we're going to have a meeting on the substance of this in due course. I think that this also, for me, highlights an opportunity in terms of our engagement with Ngāti Toa, the opportunity of trying to educate and inform the important cultural values that sit at those spaces. And I reflect on this because I think about, Ngāti Toa domain. And I think about, the space that has been used by freedom campers or people who are stopping over there. And then right next door is a site in brick, the old prison, the old stockade, where whanaunga of our mana whenua were prosecuted and hung, as I understand it, in that location. There is no explicit mention of this. And it is a painful thing, and it is something in the past, and we need to move forward. As I think about something that Helmut would remind me to have in front of my mind. But to not mention that represents an opportunity lost in terms of providing more cultural awareness, more cultural safety, and protecting the taonga for that space, which would be a good way of demonstrating manaakitanga in spite of this decision of this process. Kia ora.
Jeff, when I was growing up, there was a sign there, and there was a much better. It was many, many moons ago.
True.
And so I agree with you.
That sign
the sign's not there, and nor has the fence and everything around it. So it's not protected anymore.
Through the mayor, we are putting some signage up there, though.
Thank you. And also, no stepping on it, because, it used to be a lot bigger.
It's a very big sign, and it's Ngāti Toa helping us pay for it.
Thank you. Okay. Ross.
Sorry, I'm still slightly confused. So are we in this position because we went out with a number of sites, some of which, in hindsight, we probably wouldn't have gone out with? And because we've done that, does that mean under the Freedom Camping Act we have to have damn good reasons for not proceeding with those sites, if that were the case? Or can we just say, as Jeff has said, or whoever said, on the basis of health and safety, we're not going to go ahead with this site, we're going to refuse it? Why is the Freedom Camping Act dictating to us what we can and can't do in terms of what sites we want and what sites we don't want?
So at the individual site level, yes, if we have a valid rationale for not allowing it there, we can. The risk we get into now is that you also can't just be in general overly prohibitive. And so even if we were to say, yeah, all the sites we looked at, we now think they're not appropriate, if we aren't providing enough freedom camping sites in general, that could also be in
Well, excuse me, if other people around the area are not providing freedom camping sites, why is it incumbent upon us to take up cudgels on behalf of others?
It's not. We can say no.
Well,
but in terms of if there's not enough regionally,
I just want to understand that we can just say sorry, no, and we're not saying yes to the site because we believe there are significant health and safety reasons, for example, and then that may be true of two sites, and they're not going to come back at us and say, oh well, we think that you're being unfair or whatever. I mean, it's our decision, is it not?
Yeah, it is. In terms of that adequate provision rule, you have to provide enough within your area, but granted, if councils around us aren't providing freedom camping sites, then that could lead to a lot of demand for our sites, and the Freedom Camping Act would take quite a permissive approach and say, well, you have to provide for that. So I think the decision is ultimately, do we go ahead with that, or do we say the status quo is actually the better way of managing it in Porirua?
So that if the status quo is we're not going to bring in the Freedom Camping Act and we'll just let it go as we are, that was a I guess that's a legitimate outcome for us to talk about in due course.
Yep.
Nathan.
What is enough freedom camping space in our city?
Precisely.
So that's hard. That's difficult to know. Because some councils have been taken to court some councils in the South Island for having a too restrictive approach to freedom camping, where they've gone to maybe 1 or 2 sites only, and then they've been taken to court off the back of that for having an overly restrictive approach.
Yeah, there's no rule. There's nothing in the Act which says this is how it's determined. It is just a statement of you have to make sure to provide enough. Actually, it's the reverse. It says you can't be overly prohibitive. So this is a relatively new Act. It's only been just over a decade. So there's not a lot of precedent to go on in terms of making these decisions of when do you hit that line where you're being crossing it.
So following Councillor Hayward's point, just to add to that, what we're balancing is the voices we've heard from the community, coupled with your procedural points around, is it defensible based on the criteria allocated under the Freedom Camping Act to limit or restrict some of the sites or take the sites off? So we're just got to make sure that that test is defensible, so that if the people who are pro those sites challenge us, we have a defensible and robust position to take that that can stand up. So that's one of the things we're deliberating on to bring back based on all the information that we've had to test the.
But you didn't have to test it to put it on our papers, so that makes no sense.
So all the feedback that's come back, we're looking at the sites that have come up as being, can we change our proposal and use the criteria in the Act that will respond to the community's views and yours, but still keeping the Freedom Camping Act. Does that make more sense? Am I explaining that right?
I'll let it go. Kathleen, Ross, Mike. So Kathleen's next.
Just curious, who took that council to court? Was it Freedom Campers? Was it the government?
The New Zealand Motor Caravan Association.
In every instance across the country, it's been New Zealand Motor Caravan Association versus the council.
Oh, okay. In terms of enforcement, which is a large part of this bylaw, has there been any analysis done around, because you've mentioned the cost of what, you'd need to get another staff member or, so we know the sort of rough cost part, but has there been an analysis around the benefits that freedom camping would bring in terms of money?
We have not done that here. Some other councils have commissioned reports like that. It depends a lot on your local context, but I can't speculate into what it might be in Porirua.
Okay, so we don't really know, it could just be money down the drain, or if we don't go ahead and it's something that boosts our economy, we don't know any measurable data yet to...
Correct. We don't have data that says what is the spend of freedom campers in Porirua in our local economy. We don't have that data. Anecdotally, you'd say, and it's not our site, but the site that's next to the Urban Bakery in Ulrich Street, that more than likely benefits a lot from freedom campers, but that's not our site.
That's not freedom camping.
That's anecdotal, that's right. It's not freedom.
It is.
Bakery.
It is the motorhome. Is that?
Look, I also had a bit of a question too around the Ocean Parade suggestion. So, because wasn't the issue that the accessibility, and because it's a small road, and that was the safety issue. So, wouldn't that still be a safety issue outside of summer?
It would be less so in the sense that there's not as much traffic, but in terms of just navigating it, yes.
So, just wondering why this option is it? Is it just so we have more sites in there while you're proposing this, or?
So I think if we go back, the original bylaw as we drafted it did get a legal review, and the feedback was this is in line with the Freedom Camping Act. Based on the feedback we've received, there's potentially enough evidence you could make a case for, okay, not at all at Ocean Parade, not at all at Terrace Road, not at all at Bedford Court, potentially even not at all at Camborne Walkway. So what we're trying to balance now is that if we undertook every case and said none of these sites at all, now think, okay, now we've likely to be in violation of the Act. So we're trying to balance whether those concerns are enough that we can rule it out or say there's enough here to support it.
Okay, cool.
Ross.
Yeah, so we've shot ourselves in the foot, as I said before, by coming up with these sites, yeah? I mean, to me, it beggars belief, actually, that we cannot make decisions based on what we believe is correct. But so I just, as a matter of interest, this is forcing, if we go through with some of this stuff, forcing costs on us, which we'll never recoup, on our ratepayers. Are we allowed to charge under the Freedom Camping Act for sites? No? So it is free.
Yeah.
Freedom camping.
Yeah.
Damn. So can you just remind me, because my computer's gone down, what are the non-reserve sites?
Maybe I can bring those up.
Yeah, if you could bring them up again for...
I think maybe that's not it.
Who's that?
Magic.
Wow.
So that was the proposed bylaw.
So Ngāti Toa Domain and Brady's Bay are the two reserve sites. The other sites are on non-reserve lands. Motukaraka Point is mostly non-reserve. There's boundaries cross.
As has been pointed out by ratepayer.
So what happens if we want to move something off that with Brady's Bay with no toilets? Is that going to put us in more problems with the bylaw?
If we decide
to take it off because there's no toilets and the lady's sick of picking up the poop every day, is that going to make us even bigger in trouble with having a freedom camping law because we're actually removing sites, not adding?
I think we would have to get a legal review and consider whether we're being permissive enough if we...
I think you might need to do that.
But that's a reserve. That's a reserve. So we're talking here about whether we do both.
Yeah.
Some under
freedom camping.
reserves where we have certain rights, and then others under the Freedom Camping Act, correct?
Yep.
Yeah, where we have...
But we're using that one as freedom camping.
Right.
And it's having stuff in it every day that somebody else is having to clean up.
Yeah. Well, the same would go for Ngāti Toa Domain if we didn't replace it either.
We've got toilets there.
Yes, hey, I understand that. But if it was one fewer
if we
than
removed
there is
any,
now,
and Campbell Walkway is not even on there, in the sense it's not an existing site.
No, I don't see. Well,
So, nor is Terrace Road. So anyway, Mike.
So the status quo is looking better all the time, isn't it?
Actually,
When it comes to enforcement, I read there where homelessness is not deemed to be freedom camping, and someone who's stopped because they are tired from driving, what sort of time are those people given to actually stop their car and have a sleepover or whatever? Can they stay the whole night just resting?
I don't believe there's anything in the Act specifying what that time frame is. We'd have to look to other councils, see if anyone's been charged with any precedent for that, but I'm not aware of any precedent determining what that length of time is.
On a practical sense, mostly what we do if someone's been around for a while in a car, and we've had cases of this, none of you who have been around for a while will know we've had cases of this, we tend to use the carrot, not the stick. We just talk to people and, ask them to move on. So we always take that human to human approach when we've got those sorts of cases, and often there is more than meets the eye with people in those sorts of circumstances. So our partnership team often gets involved from a more social space. So it's not something we have to enforce a lot in the strictest sense.
So question, if we had stuck to status quo, we need to have toilets in these places. That adds another cost because it's not acceptable to Ngāti Toa to have people in set places, yet on one site, right by the harbour, is where we're having people do this daily.
The reserves management plans are being reviewed, and so I think if we go to status quo, I think that is where the original freedom camping rules come from. So I think that would be an appropriate process to look at it as part of that. If we stick with the status quo, we can then reconsider the current sites in their entirety.
think we've probably asked you more questions than, yeah. Yeah. Any more questions? Sorry, I've had a few, sorry. Going around the room. Anyone? Thank you very much. Okay, we will end with a karakia. Thank you very much, gentlemen. That was very helpful. Is that the machine? Oh, it's you. Whoever made the presentations, you've made them entertaining. Okay, it's coming up on the screen. You're going to lead us.
I actually can't remember which. Oh, yeah, that's right. I thought it was going to be another karakia. I was like, oh, hang on, that's not the one for this context. Okay, everybody, well done. We made it to the end. Toru wha, kia horo te marino, kia whakapapa paunamu te moana, he huarahi mā tātou e te rangi nei. Aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou ia tātou katoa, hui e, tae ki e. Let's go Mets.